If last week when I said if you're trying to get on more podcasts, here's how to be a better guest, you thought, I'm a guest on podcasts all the time. I really wish that hosts knew these things. This is that episode. Today we're going to talk about 4 things hosts can do to get better results from their episodes that feature guests and support their guests a little better. Let's get into it. Welcome to Uncommonly More with Stacey Harris. I am Stacey. I'm the host of this show and the CEO of podcast production agency Uncommonly More. My team and I work with podcasters just like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of sales teams with professional, strategic podcast production. You know what? I think that's enough. Let's get into the show and we'll talk more there. All right. Last week we dug in and we went from pitch straight through to marketing and promoting and sharing the show. And I want to take that same trajectory this week because there are also things on the host side that we can do to set the guests up for success. And when our guests succeed and have a good experience, guess what? So does the listener. And that's what we want. That's our ultimate responsibility, right? And I want to remind you before we dig into this, we did an episode a few months ago about dealing with difficult guests and having to make some decisions in your post-production about guests. I want you to listen to that one in addition to this one because there is some fundamental importance there around making decisions for your show that I think are important. So I wanted to make sure I included that here. So I will link it in the description and in the show notes. Head over to that one next. But let's dig into this one. Factually, before we dig into this one, I want to remind you, if you haven't yet, to check out this month's episodes of the podcast Newsroom. We're talking about what to do when timing dictates that now is not the time to launch a show and how to stay connected with that goal and the new show, even if your launch needs to be pushed back a little bit for whatever reason. So we talk about that. Head over to uncommonlymore.com/newsroom to get exclusive private access to that feed. I think that's it. Cool. Let's dig in now with the first thing you need to know to be a better podcast host. And that's, you also need to do your research. This is how we started our list last week, and it's as important here as it is there. So often I see hosts pitching guests because they, and I hope you can hear my air quotes here, but because they have a big audience. Because if I get this massive following to listen to this person that they've very likely heard on their other shows, then they'll all love me so much they'll come hang out and listen to my show, which is not a great tactic. And someday we'll do a whole episode on this maybe, but not a good plan. And if you do invite someone because you respect them and it has nothing to do with their audience size and you just know they're going to be incredibly helpful for your audience and you're going to be able to have a really engaging and quality conversation that helps your listeners do what they need to do, cool, go for it. But make sure that you've done the work. Don't just come to the show ready to wing it. Understand what you want out of the show. What is the takeaway you want listeners to have when they're done with your conversation? Be ready to have an actual back and forth. Participate in the conversation. We're going to talk about this forward in another one, but I want to be really clear. There's as much research you need to do as the guest. And this is also true if you're pitched by someone else. Honestly, maybe more true. If you are getting pitched, you should be going down a research rabbit hole of what other shows have they been on. When I get pitched, so we don't actually take pitched guests on this show at this point. It's a sort of blanket decision I've made. But when I did, the very first thing I did was go listen to other guest appearances. I want to know what they're like in an interview. I want to know how they answer questions. And I can generally tell if a show is a show that's going to edit a guest into sounding better than the guest sounds, which is one of the reasons I listen to more than one show, before I ever respond. Now the response is much quicker because it's almost always no. But you need to take the time to figure out where they're going to fit in for your listeners. we talked about this last week, this idea of you being the executive producer of your show, and you have a responsibility to your listenership. That means doing this research up front, coming ready to move the conversation how you want to move the conversation. Cool? All right, the second thing you need to do to be a better podcast host, give clear expectations. Both before, when you're reaching out with whatever platform you're going to be recording on, whether that is Zoom or, I don't know, do people still use Skype for podcast interviews? I did for a long time because I could get a much cleaner recording than I could get out of Zoom. Riverside, that's what we've been using for our guest interviews the last couple times we've had guests. Zencastr, we've worked with clients who use Zencastr. Whatever the platform is, make sure that you set them up for success. Give them really clear expectations around when to show up, what they need to have ready, headphones, microphone suggestions. You got to remember, not all podcast guests are podcasters. Although I'll be honest, I really prefer podcast guests who are podcasters because it makes my job as the host easier. But set them up. Let them know what to expect. If you're using a platform like Riverside or you're using a platform like Zencastr, where it is a specialty software, make sure you send over instructions. Make sure you send over a link or to a YouTube video or something like that on what to expect in the interface. What's cool is that these tools have created really good resources to send your guest before the show. Equip them with that. Set clear expectations. And then give them clear expectations of where you want the conversation to go. I love, once we're on the call, getting ready to dig in, giving the guest a kind of a quick rundown. Here's the bullet points I have in front of me that I want to make sure we cover in this episode. I don't like a script, just like in these episodes I don't script. I work off the same sort of bullet point structure. In fact, that's all that I have written down for the show is 4 bullet points, and they are literally the 4 things I'm going to say to you. I'll share those with the guest. I'll say, hey, I'm hoping we start here and then we move here. And I really want this to be a key takeaway for them. And that'll be where we'll close. Then I'll ask where you can point them. Do you have an idea of what you want them to be? I do kind of sort of get my guests thinking about that stuff. I like this because I like to let them be ready. If you have a question that you ask every guest, I've had hosts do this with me when I've been a guest. Make sure you let them know that in advance. They should, as your guest, if they listen to last week's episode, should already know that because they've listened to 1 or 2 of your shows. But I always like to know in advance. I don't have a question I ask everybody. But I always like to know in advance if there's going to be a question I need to, because it's clearly a thing for your show. Nudge me so that I can think of a really good answer. Set expectations. Let them know what's going to be happening, what the process will be. Also, depending on how you end, maybe you're going to wrap up the show and say goodbye, but you want them to stay on line with you. Let them know that's what's going to happen. Hey, we're not recording right now. This is just us. We'll start recording. This is also when I do, if there's something later that you want us to take out of the show, just let me know and we can remove it. But let them know that then. Also, let them know what's going to happen at the end of the show. At the end of the show, I'm going to say, bye, thanks for listening. And then I will, and let them know that they're free to go, or you want to close out with them. I like to close out and say goodbye and thank you. But yeah, that's what you want to do. Give clear expectations. The third piece to being a better podcast host, again, tying into our number 3 from last week, it's got to be more than a call and response Q&A. Make sure you are participating in the conversation. When the guest answers your question, take something they said and expand on it. Reiterate it. It doesn't always have to be that you build on it, because maybe you're really highlighting their expertise, or maybe it's a case study episode and you are speaking about the impact you've had and you don't want to be like, and I did this too, but reiterate. What I'm hearing there is you say, blah, blah, blah. It's a really great point about XYZ. Whatever those pieces are, reiterate them, bring them back, expand on them, talk through the process. This will help give your listener the opportunity to process really incredible takeaways your guests inevitably have, but also it will introduce more voices. The great thing about a host-guest or a dual host situation is that back and forth, is the conversational rhythm that can come. Don't kill that by waiting for them to complete their answer, pausing, and then asking your next question. You will remove every bit of personality from the interaction, and that's not at all what you want to be doing. To wrap us up, the fourth thing you can be doing to be a better podcast host, again, ties into our last week's number 4. If you want them to share, make it really, really freaking easy. I'm talking about putting a Google Drive folder together or a Dropbox folder together with the assets, with a Google Doc or a doc inside of Dropbox. You can tell I use Google Docs, with a list of Instagram posts, hashtag suggestions, whatever. LinkedIn post ideas, whatever it is. Make it really easy for them to share. Give them the assets to do so that they can share. Equip them to. Also, ask them to. When the episode goes live, send them an email. Say, thank you for being on the show. Here's how you can share it. I really appreciate you taking the time. If having guests on your show is a key part of your strategy, you need to be taking care of them because they are an incredibly important link to your next great guest. They are the key to a whole nother audience because they likely have their own audience that they've brought to your show. So make it really easy for them to invite them to your show. Don't miss that opportunity. All right. We kept this brief today, which is good. I want you to take one of these things and I want you to implement them. I want you to do the doing that comes after the listening. It's absolutely critical. As we wrap up, I want to remind you, if you are looking for some support with your show, if your show is feeling like enough to-dos and you're like, Stacey, I cannot make the guest experience any better. I don't have time. I'm editing. Let's have a conversation about handing your show off. Head over to uncommonlymore.com/podcast production and let's talk about how we can take over the production of your show so that you can spend more time engaging with your guests, marketing your show, and, building your business and doing the sales and all of the other things you have on that to-do list. I know, I do too. Speaking of that to-do list, let's wrap this up and head back to it. I will see you next week. Thanks for listening. If you made it to this point of the show and you still happen to be listening, which statistically is unlikely, I want to say thank you for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I want to hear from you. So reach out on social or via email and let me know what actions you're going to take from today's episode. Because honestly, that's why we produce this show. That's why I record this show. It's why my team does all the work to release this show. Is so that we can help you. We can help make a difference in your show and consequently in your business. If you haven't left a review for the show, head over to ratethispod.com/more. It's an easy way to show some love to the show and also help us reach more podcasters who are looking for the same kind of support you were looking for. If you have any suggestions or ideas or thoughts you would like me to address on the show, be sure to reach out. Again, like I say a lot, this is the start of the conversation, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.